In the cold, unforgiving walls of Redwood State Penitentiary, a heavily tattooed white inmate stood over a quiet black man eating his first prison meal. With a cruel smirk, he poured a full can of juice over the new inmate's head while the cafeteria erupted in laughter. The room fell silent for just a moment, waiting for a reaction. Any reaction. But the man didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes down, fists clenched under the table, jaw tight. What no one in that room knew, what the bully couldn't have possibly imagined, was that the man he just humiliated was once called the Reaper in the cage, a 3-time world champion, undefeated in 38 fights, a man who had broken bones, shattered egos, and left opponents unconscious in under 2 minutes. But now, he was just inmate 04729, and he had 3 years left to survive. His name was Marcus, the Reaper, Holloway. Outside these walls, that name meant something. It meant power, respect, fear. Inside Redwood, it meant nothing. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. 6 months ago, he was on top of the world, literally standing in the center of a sold-out arena in Las Vegas, holding 2 championship belts over his head while 20,000 people chanted his name. He was the face of the sport, the first black heavyweight champion to hold titles in 2 divisions simultaneously. Sponsors fought over him. Kids wore his merchandise. He was untouchable. Until he wasn't. It started with a single night, a confrontation outside a nightclub. A drunk man, white, loud, aggressive, shouting racial slurs at Marcus and his younger brother Ty. Marcus tried to walk away. He always did. He knew what his hands could do. He knew the damage. But when the man shoved Ty to the ground and spit on him, something inside Marcus snapped. 1 punch. That's all it took. The man's skull hit the pavement, and 3 days later, he died in the ICU. Self-defense, Marcus's lawyer argued. Manslaughter, the jury decided. 3 years in Redwood State Penitentiary. Now, Marcus walked through the prison yard in an orange jumpsuit, head low, trying to blend in. He'd shaved his head, grew out his beard. He didn't want to be recognized. Fame was a target in here, and he knew it. His lawyer had warned him, keep your head down, do your time, don't make waves. But in a place like Redwood, waves came looking for you. The prison was split into invisible territories, racial lines drawn in blood and silence. The Aryan Brotherhood controlled the west side. The Chirenos held the east. Black inmates clustered together for protection. But Marcus didn't know anyone here. He was an outsider, a celebrity thrown into a world where reputation didn't transfer, where yesterday's glory meant nothing, and where every man had to prove himself or be devoured. His cellmate was an older man named Benny, a lifer who'd been locked up since the 90s. Benny was wise in the way only long-timers could be. Quiet, observant, always 3 steps ahead. You got a target on your back, young blood, Benny said the first night, sitting on the lower bunk and rolling a cigarette from contraband tobacco. I know who you are. Saw you fight on TV once. That flying knee you dropped on Volkov? Beautiful. But in here, that don't mean shit. In here, you just fresh meat. Marcus didn't respond. He lay on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling, fists still aching from the memory of that 1 punch that cost him everything. Listen, Benny continued, his voice low and serious. You keep your mouth shut, you don't look nobody in the eye too long, and you definitely don't show weakness. These boys in here, they test you, and if you fail, you either fall in line or you don't make it out. Marcus nodded. He understood the rules. He'd spent his whole life in hierarchies. Gyms, fight camps, the octagon. But this was different. This was survival. The next morning, Marcus walked into the cafeteria for breakfast. It was massive. Hundreds of men sitting in clusters, the noise deafening. Trays clanged, voices shouted. Guards stood along the perimeter, hands on their batons, eyes scanning. Marcus grabbed his tray, watery eggs, stale toast, a bruised apple, and looked for a place to sit. That's when he felt the eyes on him. A group of white inmates sitting near the far wall. Tattoos crawling up their necks, shaved heads, cold stares. The leader was a man named Garrett Crazy G. Sullivan, 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and hate. His arms were covered in swastikas and iron crosses. He was a shot caller for the Aryan Brotherhood, a man who ruled through fear and violence. And he was looking right at Marcus. Marcus chose a table near the middle, sitting alone. He kept his head down, eating slowly, trying to disappear. But he could feel it, the tension building like a storm cloud overhead. He'd been here less than 24 hours, and already the predators were circling. Benny's words echoed in his head. They test you. Marcus took another bite of toast, chewing slowly, his jaw tight. And then he heard the footsteps.
The footsteps grew louder, heavier. Marcus didn't look up. He kept his eyes on his tray, his breathing steady, his mind sharp. Years in the cage had taught him to stay calm under pressure, to never react before assessing the threat. But this wasn't the octagon. There were no referees here, no rules, no bell to save you. Garrett Sullivan stopped directly behind him. Marcus could feel the man's presence, looming, oppressive, deliberate. The cafeteria noise seemed to dim, as if the entire room was holding its breath. "Yo, new fish," Garrett's voice boomed, thick with mockery. "You deaf or something? I'm talking to you." Marcus kept eating. His hand gripped the plastic fork a little tighter. Garrett leaned down, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "I asked you a question, boy." The word hung in the air like poison. Boy. Marcus's jaw clenched, his pulse quickened, but he didn't move. He knew what this was. A test. The first of many. Garrett straightened up, chuckling. "Oh, I get it. You think you too good to talk to me." He turned to his crew, who were now standing behind him, smirking. "This boy thinks he's special." One of them, a lanky man with a teardrop tattoo under his eye, laughed. "Maybe he needs a welcome gift." Before Marcus could react, Garrett grabbed a can of fruit punch from the table and poured it over Marcus's head. The cold liquid soaked through his hair, dripping down his face, onto his tray, ruining what little food he had. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, white inmates howling, others watching in silence, some shaking their heads. Marcus sat frozen, juice dripping from his chin. His fists clenched under the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to stand up, to spin around and drive his elbow through Garrett's teeth, to show them who he really was. But Benny's voice echoed in his head. "Don't show weakness. Don't make waves." Marcus exhaled slowly. He picked up a napkin, wiped his face, and stood up. Without a word, he picked up his tray and walked toward the trash. The laughter followed him. Voices mocked him. "Look at him run! Scared little bitch! Welcome to Redwood, boy!" Marcus dumped his tray and walked out of the cafeteria, his head high, despite the humiliation burning inside him like acid. He could feel every eye on him, inmates, guards, everyone. Judgment, pity, contempt. When he returned to his cell, Benny was lying on his bunk, reading a worn paperback. He didn't look up. "You did the right thing," Benny said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. He climbed onto his bunk, staring at the ceiling, fists still trembling. The next few days were hell. Word spread fast.
Marcus, the Reaper Holloway, once undefeated, once untouchable, had been punked in front of the entire prison. And in a place like Redwood, that kind of weakness was blood in the water. Everywhere Marcus went, he was tested. In the yard, inmates would bump into him, shoulder-checking him deliberately. In the showers, they'd accidentally knock his soap onto the filthy floor. In the cafeteria, they'd take his seat, his food, daring him to do something about it. And he didn't. He couldn't, because the moment he fought back, the moment he showed them what he was capable of, everything would escalate. He'd be labeled a threat. The gangs would target him. The guards would isolate him. His 3 years would turn into a nightmare. But the humiliation was eating him alive. One afternoon in the yard, Marcus stood alone by the fence, watching the other inmates play basketball, lift weights, talk in clusters. He felt invisible, powerless. For the first time in his life, Marcus Holloway didn't know who he was. A voice broke his thoughts. "Yo, champ!" Marcus turned. It was Darius, a younger black inmate with sharp eyes and a quiet confidence. He leaned against the fence beside Marcus, arms crossed. "I know who you are, Dara. Saw you knock out Volkov in the third. That was beautiful, man. Real talk." Marcus nodded slightly, but said nothing. Darius continued. "But you gotta understand something, bro. In here, your past don't matter. Only thing that matters is what you do right now. And right now," he looked Marcus in the eye, "you're getting played." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I'm doing my time, staying out of trouble." "Nah," Darius said, shaking his head. "You're letting them make you a target. And once you're a target in here, it don't stop. It gets worse." Marcus looked away, his fists clenching. "Look," Darius said, his voice softer now. "I'm not saying you gotta fight every fool who tests you, but at some point, you gotta draw a line, or they're gonna walk all over you until you break." Marcus didn't respond, but Darius's words burrowed deep. That night, it escalated. Marcus was in the bathroom washing his hands when 3 white inmates walked in, Garrett's crew. They blocked the door, trapping him inside. The lanky one with the teardrop tattoo grinned. "What's good, champ? Still too scared to talk?" Marcus turned slowly, his back to the sink, his eyes cold. "We just want to welcome you proper," another one said, cracking his knuckles. Marcus's heart pounded. His training kicked in. Assess the threats, calculate the angles, find the exit. But there was no exit. Just 3 men between him and the door. The teardrop guy stepped forward, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. "You gonna do something, or you gonna cry like a little—" Marcus moved. In a flash, he sidestepped the second shove, grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, and slammed his face into the mirror. The glass shattered. The man crumbled to the floor, blood pouring from his nose. The other 2 froze, stunned. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, staring at them. "Get out," he said, his voice low and deadly. They backed up, grabbed their bleeding friend, and fled. Marcus stood alone in the bathroom, shards of glass glittering on the floor, his reflection fractured in the broken mirror. And he knew. Everything had just changed.
The next morning, the tension in Redwood was suffocating. Word of what happened in the bathroom had spread like wildfire. Marcus had crossed the line. He'd drawn blood, and now everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Marcus walked into the cafeteria for breakfast, and the room went quiet. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even the guards seemed on edge. He grabbed his tray and sat down at the same table as before, alone, in the middle. He kept his head down, eating slowly, but his senses were razor sharp.
The next morning, the tension in Redwood was suffocating. Word of what happened in the bathroom had spread like wildfire. Marcus had crossed the line. He'd drawn blood. And now everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Marcus walked into the cafeteria for breakfast, and the room went quiet. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even the guards seemed on edge. He grabbed his tray and sat down at the same table as before, alone, in the middle. He kept his head down, eating slowly, but his senses were razor sharp. He could feel it coming. And then Garrett Sullivan entered. The entire cafeteria seemed to shift. Inmates moved out of his way. His crew flanked him, and the man with the broken nose, bandaged and bruised, glared at Marcus with murder in his eyes. Garrett walked straight toward Marcus's table, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. He stopped a few feet away, towering over him. "So," Garrett said, his voice calm but dripping with menace, "you got hands." Marcus didn't look up. He kept eating. "I respect that. But see, you put hands on one of mine. And in here, that means you disrespected all of us." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes meeting Garrett's, cold, unflinching. "He touched me first," Marcus said evenly. Garrett smiled, a sick, twisted smile. "Yeah, and now I'm gonna touch you." Before Marcus could react, Garrett grabbed his tray and flipped it, sending food flying. Then he grabbed Marcus by the collar and yanked him to his feet. The cafeteria exploded into chaos. Inmates swarmed, forming a circle, chanting, shouting. Guards blew whistles, rushing toward the commotion, but they were too slow. Garrett threw the first punch, a wild haymaker aimed at Marcus's jaw. Marcus ducked, pivoted, and drove his fist into Garrett's ribs, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Ribs cracked. Garrett gasped, stumbling back. But his crew rushed in, grabbing Marcus from behind, holding his arms. Garrett recovered, his face twisted in rage, and drove his fist into Marcus's stomach, then his face. Blood exploded from Marcus's nose. Marcus roared, breaking free with sheer strength, elbowing one attacker in the jaw, spinning and kicking another in the chest, sending him flying into a table. Garrett charged again, and this time, Marcus met him head-on. He slipped Garrett's punch, grabbed his arm, and used his momentum to slam him face-first into the concrete floor with a devastating judo throw. Garrett didn't move. The cafeteria went silent. Marcus stood over him, breathing hard, blood dripping from his face, his eyes wild. And then the guards swarmed him, tackling him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they dragged Marcus away, he looked back at the cafeteria, at the faces staring at him. Fear, respect, awe. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was the Reaper again.
Marcus spent the next 2 weeks in solitary confinement. The concrete cell was 8 feet by 6. No windows, no sound, nothing but cold silence. It gave him time to think, to breathe, to process what had just happened. He'd broken his promise to himself. He'd fought back. And now, there would be consequences. But as he sat in that cell, something inside him shifted. For the first time since he'd arrived at Redwood, Marcus didn't feel powerless. He didn't feel like a victim. He felt like himself again. When he was released back into general population, everything was different. Inmates nodded at him in the yard. Black inmates welcomed him into their circle. Even some of the guards treated him with quiet respect. Garrett Sullivan? He was transferred to another facility, his reputation shattered along with his jaw. Marcus learned later that the fight had been caught on security cameras. The footage showed clearly that Garrett had instigated, that Marcus had defended himself. The warden, under pressure from Marcus's lawyer and public scrutiny, reduced Marcus's sentence by 6 months for self-defense under duress. But more than that, Marcus had earned something far more valuable than time off. He'd earned his dignity back. Months later, sitting in the yard with Darius and Benny, Marcus reflected on everything. "I spent my whole life fighting in a cage," Marcus said quietly. "I thought that made me strong. But in here, I learned that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. It's about not letting anyone strip you of who you are." Darius nodded. "You stood up, bro. That's all that matters." Benny smiled. "The Reaper's back." Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Nah, the Reaper's dead. I'm just Marcus now." On the day Marcus walked out of Redwood, 2.5 years after he'd entered, reporters and cameras waited outside. His story had gone viral. The fallen champion who'd survived prison, who'd stood up to racism and violence, who'd reclaimed his humanity. But Marcus didn't stop for interviews. He walked straight to the parking lot, where his younger brother Ty was waiting. They hugged long and hard. "I'm proud of you, bro," Ty said, tears in his eyes. Marcus smiled. "I'm proud of me too." As they drove away, Marcus looked back at the prison one last time. He thought about Garrett, about Benny, about Darius, about all the men still trapped inside those walls, fighting invisible battles, struggling to hold on to their dignity in a system designed to strip it away. And he made a promise. He would use his voice, his platform, his story to fight for them, to shine a light on the racism, the violence, the injustice that thrived in the shadows. Because Marcus Holloway wasn't just a fighter, he was a survivor. And his fight had only just begun.